Hi everyone. If you're a subscriber, welcome back. If you're new to my channel, my name is Riley. Welcome to my garden. Today we're talking about garden planning, and I have a whole list of jobs that I have to get completed this weekend so that this garden is ready to start to receive transplants in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And as I'm doing all these jobs today, I'm going to be talking about how I plan the garden. Everything I do to plan out what I'm going to be planting, where I'm going to be planting it, when I'm going to be starting my seeds, when I'm going to be transplanting, everything I do to make sure my garden has the best chance for success. My first job today is to clean out these patio beds, and I'm not going to go in and pull this dead material up by the roots. I will use some clippers like this. I'll clip them off at the base of the soil, and then all of this will go into my compost bin. But how do I know what I'm going to plant where in my garden? The tool that I use is Microsoft Excel because I'm used to using that software. I draw a grid of all of the beds in my garden, and I enter into that grid in Excel what I plan to plant where. Now, you don't have to use Excel. You could use any software you're comfortable with, or you could just do it on paper. But one tip I do have is do it in pencil if you're going to do it on paper, because things are going to change. You will have, from your original plan, some of your seed starts, some plants will do better than others. You will have more of some than you have of others versus your original plan, and the plan for your garden will change. So if you're doing it by hand, do it by pencil, because you're going to need to make changes as your garden progresses through the planting period, and you'll want to keep a good record of what you've got planted where to know how well it did in those locations and whether you want to plant it again in those locations in future years. First job is done. I've removed or cut back everything in these beds, and I have a big pile of material there that's ready to go in the compost bin. We have one more job to do before we go over to the compost bin, but one more comment about garden planning. I really only go by one general rule, and that is I try not to plant the same variety of plant in the same place 2 seasons in a row. So if I grow tomatoes in one spot in my garden one season, the next season I'll change that up and I'll plant something else like beans or peas or something in that location, and I'll move the tomatoes to another location. In my garden, I don't have to worry about the amount of sunlight because everywhere in my garden gets about 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. But some plants need 6 to 8 hours of sunlight, like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers. And other plants will do well with partial shade. And all that information is on the seed pack that you purchase. So it will tell you right on that seed pack how many hours of sunlight these plants need a day. If your garden, some areas get full sun, some get partial sun, you need to take that into account when you're drawing up your garden plan of what you're going to plant where. Job number 2 today for me is to clean up the jasmine on this arbor with this tool from Ryobi. I'll be taking everything I cut away from this, adding it into my wagon here, and all of that will then be going into my compost bin. Before I do this, I want to talk about another resource to use for your garden planning, and that is, how do you know when to plant each certain vegetable in your garden? How do you know when to start your seeds indoors? How do you know if you need to start your seeds indoors or you can direct transplant these seeds? How do you know when you should transplant them from indoors into your garden? And there's 3 tips I can give on this if you're a new gardener. If you're in the US, the first tip is the online version of Farmer's Almanac. And I believe it's farmersalmanac.com, but I'll put a link in the video description below. And in there, there'll be planting calendars where you can enter the zip code of where you live, and it will give you the general planting dates for your area of when you should be starting certain plants indoors, when you should be transplanting those plants into your garden, and when you should be direct seeding plants for like turnips and carrots and things that work best direct seed into the garden, when you should be direct seeding those vegetables directly into your garden. And it's a great resource for a beginner to start with. Another resource, and one that I use in my area, is if you go to Google and do a search for master gardener in the county and state you live in, there is in my area a web page for my county's certified master gardeners, and they go through a state certification, and these are just expert gardeners that garden in the same county that you garden in. And in my county, these master gardeners put together their own planting schedule just for my small county based on their combined years of experience on when we should be planting what vegetables in this area. And that has been a great resource for me. So give that a try. You may find that available where you live if you're in the US. The last tip I would give would be, no matter what all of those planting calendars say, don't be afraid to experiment a little bit based on your experience after 1 or 2 years of gardening. Don't be afraid to experiment. You may find some plants on that planting calendar, you can plant them out 2 or 3 weeks early, or some that say you shouldn't even grow at this time of year that you may be able to grow. So don't be afraid to experiment. Well, another job done. This is ready to go into the compost bin. But before we do that, let's just summarize. We talked about how to plan for what you're going to grow and what location in your garden. We talked about how you identify the important planting dates of when to plant what for your garden. Now let's talk about an equally important plan, maybe the most important plan, or certainly just as equally important as those two. Let's talk about our plan for watering. This is so critical. If you're a new gardener, or maybe you've gardened one season and you put all that time and energy into growing some beautiful tomatoes or zucchini, and you came out one day and you saw that the bottom of those tomato plants or those zucchini plants on the ends were just rotting from the end, turning brown and rotting. That's called blossom end rot, and 99 times out of 100, that is caused by uneven watering. And what I mean by that is letting your garden bed go completely bone dry, then adding water to it, then letting it go completely bone dry again, then adding water to it. And what that is doing is stressing the plants out. And when those plants get stressed out from uneven watering, they're unable to take up calcium from the soil. Their inability to take up calcium from the soil then causes that blossom end rot. But the root cause of why they can't get the calcium out of the soil is the uneven water. So it's really, really important you have a water source in your garden. It is so critical. Wherever you choose to put your garden, you've got a watering source. Now, 2 tips once you have your watering source. And what I mean by that is you either have an in-ground source where you've got a spigot right in your garden, or you can get a garden hose from your main house down to your garden. 2 tips for this. Number 1 would be everywhere in your garden where you've got a garden bed, or between every few garden beds, get a container like this and a watering container. Bring your hose out to them, fill it up with water. That does 2 things. The first thing it does is it makes sure that when you come out to water, there's no excuse. You've got water right there. The second reason that is a good thing is if you're concerned about chlorine in your city water, letting that water sit for 24 or 48 hours outside in a container like this, all of that chlorination is going to evaporate away. All that will be left is just pure water. So if you're worried about that, that's another good reason to go ahead and put it in a container and let it sit there for 24 to 48 hours. Now, every time you come out to water, bring your hose, because as you're taking water out of this bucket, You want to be filling that water back up. So the next time you come back out, there's no excuse for you not to be watering those plants. The last tip on watering is putting in a soaker hose system in your garden beds. And this, for my garden, completely eliminated blossom end rot. I've done a whole video on how to select a soaker hose system, how to install a soaker hose system, and I'll go ahead and put a link for that in the video description below. It's getting really hot out here. It's going to be over 100 today. If you're interested in putting in a soaker hose system or completely eliminating the risk for blossom end rot, have a look at that video. I am now going to start my second to last task of the day, and that is going to be getting a mix of my greens, which is my trimmings from my garden, my grass trimmings, and my browns behind me. I need to process those browns under my lawnmower to chop them up. I'll be mixing them into this compost bin. The compost bin's at about 125 degrees. I'll put up a screenshot of that. I'll be watering that in really good. And then my last task is going to be to clean out this chicken coop, add all the chicken manure and pine shavings into my compost bin, covering that with some more brown material. And we're going to talk about the last topic, which is how to plan for pests in your garden. Another job done, and all I have left to do now, I've got a little bit more green material to add on top of this chicken bedding. I've got some brown material to put on top of that, water that in, close this lid, and I'm done for the day. But let's talk about planning for pests, because if you're a new gardener, one thing is certain: the pests will show up. And let's first talk about really the grossest ones, and that would be rodents, rats, things like that may get into your garden. I have had rats in this garden the first year I gardened here when I moved to Texas, and I tried two different methods. One method is a live trap, just like this. You can also get bigger ones if you've got possums coming into your garden or something like that. Put a little bit of bait on the little trip lever in there, and you can catch them live. And then you can either drown them or you can go let them off somewhere in the wilderness. The other method for rats that I used was just a rat trap, and I'll put up a picture of what that looks like. And that's going to kill the rat. So you're going to come out and you're going to find that that rat has gone for the peanut butter or whatever bait you put on there, and it's just a normal mouse trap, a little wire spring, and it's going to slam down and break the back of the rat. Pretty gross stuff to deal with, but not as gross as those rats chewing on your vegetables. So super hot. Okay. Super, super hot. The other thing that I did in my garden, all around the perimeter of my fence line, I dug it out about 8 inches and I buried hardware cloth in there so nothing could burrow in from outside. Insect pests. Be prepared, be preventative, because they will show up. Number one, keep a clean and tidy garden. Make sure that you don't have a lot of leaf litter on top of your mulch, that you don't have a lot of just dying growth there. Keep your garden clean and tidy, especially on top of those beds. The other thing to do is to use your local resources. Talk to a master gardener in your area. Talk about what is the insect pressure for the vegetables you're going to be growing, and what preventative things can you do. One of my favorites for caterpillar control is Bacillus thuringiensis, which is 100% organic and works fantastically against the tomato hornworm caterpillar. I've already done a video on that, and I'll put that in the video description. The other thing you can do, and I hope you do it, is hit that subscribe button, ring that bell so you'll be notified about my next video, and come and ask me if you have a problem. I'd love to help you out, do some research for you if it's something that I've never seen before. And the last tip that I can give before I completely die from heat here is, and I think the saying goes like the best pest control is a gardener's shadow, something like that. But basically what it means is, the more you're in the garden observing your plants, the earlier you're going to find a problem, and the more time you'll have to react to that problem in an organic and safe way. So folks, that's all I've got today. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and share it. If you're not a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I love to have you join my channel. Put out videos just about every week, or I try to. And don't forget to ring that bell so you'll be notified next week when I put out a new video.